Many people imagine that decisions are made in a private space of independent thought. A person looks at options, weighs them, and chooses what seems best. If the choice goes badly, it is often explained as poor judgment or lack of discipline. But Nudge by Richard H. Thaler and Cass R. Sunstein asks us to look more carefully at the environment surrounding every decision. It argues that people do not choose in a vacuum. They choose inside systems. They choose from menus, forms, websites, schedules, institutions, defaults, reminders, and social settings that make some actions easier than others. And because human beings are sensitive to friction, complexity, timing, and framing, these surrounding details have extraordinary influence. The central claim of the book is simple but far-reaching. Small features of how choices are designed can produce large effects in behavior. The arrangement of options, the presence of a default, the clarity of information, the effort required to switch, and the signals of what other people are doing all shape decisions in ways that most people barely notice. This matters because many of life's most important outcomes depend not just on intention, but on whether the decision environment supports good follow-through. People may want to save for retirement, eat better, avoid debt, choose wisely, and plan ahead, but still fail because the systems they navigate are too complicated, too passive, or too poorly designed. Nudge asks a deceptively practical question. If we know that design always influences choice, why not design choices better? This is not merely a book about policy. It is a book about human nature, freedom, and the architecture of everyday life. Once you absorb its ideas, you begin to notice that decisions are being shaped everywhere, not only by laws and prices, but by the hidden design of the choice itself. At the center of Nudge is a challenge to the traditional economic image of human beings as consistently rational decision-makers. In standard theory, people are assumed to know what they want, process information efficiently, compare alternatives carefully, and choose in ways that best serve their interests. Thaler and Sunstein do not deny that people can reason. They deny that this idealized model describes ordinary human behavior very well. Real people procrastinate. They forget. They avoid complicated forms. They stick with what is easiest. They get overwhelmed by too many options. They are strongly influenced by the way information is framed. They care about immediate comfort more than distant outcomes. They follow the crowd. They misjudge risk. They often know what they should do, yet still do not do it. This is not a rare exception. It is a normal condition of being human. The book sometimes captures this by contrasting imaginary, perfectly rational agents with actual people. The point is not to insult human intelligence. It is to build systems for the minds people really have rather than the minds theories sometimes pretend they have. This is one of the book's deepest strengths. It does not begin from moral blame. It begins from realism. If human beings are predictably fallible, then better outcomes may depend less on demanding flawless judgment and more on creating environments that account for those predictable weaknesses. In that sense, Nudge is both modest and radical. It asks institutions to stop assuming ideal behavior and start working with actual psychology. One of the book's most powerful concepts is choice architecture. A choice architect is anyone who organizes the context in which people make decisions. This could be a policymaker designing a form, an employer setting up a benefits plan, a school arranging lunch options, a website deciding how choices appear on a screen, or a manager structuring enrollment and reminders. The critical point is that no choice environment is neutral. Options must always be ordered somehow. Something must come first. Some information will be easier to see than other information. One path will involve less effort than another. Even choosing not to design carefully is itself a design choice, because the resulting structure will still nudge people in one direction or another. This insight matters because it reframes responsibility. If influence is unavoidable, then the real question is not whether to influence, but how. Should systems be built carelessly, leaving predictable mistakes untouched? Or should they be arranged to help people navigate complexity better? Thaler and Sunstein argue that once we understand how much context shapes behavior, indifference becomes harder to defend. The architecture of choice is already doing work. It is already pushing. The only remaining question is whether it pushes blindly or intelligently. This idea broadens the book far beyond economics. It means that schools, hospitals, companies, governments, and digital platforms are all constantly shaping human action through design, whether they acknowledge it or not. Perhaps the most famous and influential idea in Nudge is the power of defaults. A default is what happens if a person does not actively choose otherwise. If employees are automatically enrolled in a retirement savings plan unless they opt out, that is a default. If someone must check a box to decline a service, that too is a default structure. Defaults matter because many people go with them, not necessarily because they deeply endorse them, but because changing course requires attention, time, effort, or confidence. In a busy and complex world, many decisions are made indirectly by what people fail to change. This gives defaults enormous practical power. The authors show that outcomes can vary dramatically depending on whether a system is built around opt-in or opt-out design. Retirement participation, insurance selections, and other important behaviors can be shaped simply by what happens when someone remains passive. This is one of the book's most striking lessons because it reveals how much decision-making is governed by inertia. People often imagine that meaningful choices arise from deliberate comparison, but in reality many important outcomes are determined by the path that requires the least friction. Thaler and Sunstein do not present this as sinister by itself. They present it as a reason for care. Since a default must exist anyway, it should be chosen thoughtfully. If a system knows that passivity is likely, then the default becomes morally significant. It is not just a technical setting. It is a powerful guide to behavior. Once this is understood, the design of defaults becomes one of the most important questions in policy and institutional life. The broad philosophy behind the book is captured in the phrase libertarian paternalism. At first glance, the phrase sounds contradictory. Libertarian suggests freedom, while paternalism suggests steering people toward what is judged better for them. Thaler and Sunstein argue that the two can coexist. Their view is that it is legitimate to nudge people toward choices that improve welfare, while still preserving freedom to choose otherwise. A person remains free to opt out, decline, ignore, or choose the less recommended path. No option is banned. No heavy penalty is imposed. Yet the system is designed so that the easier or more visible route is the one most likely to serve the person's own long-term interests. This is the moral center of the book. The authors are not calling for command and control. They are calling for thoughtful design that respects both human freedom and human limitation. Of course, this idea raises difficult questions. Who decides what counts as a better outcome? Can institutions be trusted not to overreach? How transparent should nudges be? The book recognizes these tensions, but insists that complete neutrality is impossible. Choice architecture already exists. Someone is already structuring the menu. Given that fact, Thaler and Sunstein argue it is better to arrange choices in ways that help rather than harm. Whether one fully agrees or not, the phrase libertarian paternalism forces a serious reconsideration of an old assumption. Freedom may not mean absence of influence. It may mean living in systems where influence is designed openly and where alternatives remain available. A recurring concern in Nudge is the problem of self-control. Many people want to act in ways that benefit them over the long run. They want to save more money, avoid unnecessary debt, eat better, exercise more consistently, adhere to plans, and make prudent decisions. Yet they often fail to do so. The problem is not always ignorance. It is often conflict within the self. The present self wants ease, comfort, and immediate reward. The future self wants security, health, and discipline. This tension is one of the central facts of ordinary life. Thaler and Sunstein treat it with seriousness and sympathy. Instead of simply insisting that people should be more disciplined, they explore how systems can help people do what they already wish they were doing. Automatic enrollment in savings plans, pre-commitment devices, reminders, feedback, and simplified decision structures all serve this purpose. These tools do not eliminate choice. They support follow-through. This reflects a deeper insight in the book. Weak self-control is not merely a personal moral defect. It is a predictable pattern that institutions can either worsen or ease. A badly designed environment leaves people alone with temptation and complexity. A better designed environment creates scaffolding. It helps the future-oriented self gain practical leverage over the impulsive self. In this way, nudges can become a form of compassion built into systems. Another important theme in the book is framing, the idea that how information is presented can influence how it is understood and acted upon. Two options may be objectively similar, but if one is described in a way that emphasizes gains, safety, losses, or risk, it can produce a very different reaction. Human beings do not respond only to raw facts. They respond to the meaning that presentation gives those facts. This has major implications. It means that people may believe they are reacting to substance when they are also reacting to wording, sequence, labels, and emotional emphasis. Good choice architecture takes framing seriously, not as a trick, but as an inevitable part of communication. Every presentation frames something. Some consequences are highlighted, some background. Some comparisons are made easy, others obscure. Thaler and Sunstein want this reality used responsibly. If a health form hides essential information in confusing language, that is one kind of frame. If it clarifies the most important trade-offs in plain language, that is another. The frame changes the practical quality of the decision. This principle also helps explain why behavior can be nudged without changing material incentives. Sometimes people do not need entirely new options. They need the existing options to be presented in a way that makes relevance and consequence more visible. The invisible architecture of perception matters. Human beings are social creatures, and nudge emphasizes that many choices are shaped by what people believe others are doing. In situations of uncertainty, the behavior of peers serves as information. If most people conserve energy, pay taxes on time, join a retirement plan, or choose a certain option, that fact can influence those who are undecided. The authors treat this not as a weakness to be mocked, but as a central feature of human decision-making. Social norms tell people what is common, acceptable, and sensible. They help reduce uncertainty and guide action. For that reason, nudges that make beneficial norms visible can be especially effective. A reminder that most people in a community are complying with a desirable behavior can shift individual choices more than abstract warnings or generic advice. This insight is powerful because it shows that behavior is not only private or individual. It is relational. People are constantly interpreting themselves against a background of what others seem to be doing. This means institutions can often improve outcomes by making helpful norms salient rather than assuming everyone will decide from scratch in isolation. Social influence in this framework becomes part of choice architecture. The question is not whether norms will matter. They always do. The question is which norms are made visible and how they are communicated. Freedom is often associated with having more options. Yet one of the quieter insights in nudge is that too many choices can create confusion, paralysis, or poor decisions. This is especially true when options are complex, hard to compare, or presented without structure. People may delay choosing, fall back on superficial cues, or simply stick with whatever is easiest. In other words, abundance can sometimes defeat the purpose of freedom if the chooser lacks the time, attention, or expertise to navigate it effectively. Thaler and Sunstein do not argue against choice itself. They argue for intelligible choice. A system that offers dozens of complicated alternatives without guidance may satisfy an abstract ideal of freedom while producing worse actual outcomes. Better choice architecture simplifies comparisons, groups options meaningfully, highlights major differences, and reduces unnecessary cognitive burden. This is an important correction to a common misunderstanding. More choice is not always better if it creates overload. Sometimes real autonomy requires curation, clarity, and thoughtful presentation. The book pushes readers to distinguish between freedom in theory and freedom in use. A choice that exists on paper but is buried in complexity may not function as freedom in any meaningful sense for ordinary people. The practical reach of nudge is one reason the book became so influential. Thaler and Sunstein showed that the principles of choice architecture apply across many domains. In personal finance, better defaults and automatic escalation can help people save more for retirement. In healthcare, clearer information and simpler enrollment processes can help patients and providers make better decisions. In education, better designed systems can reduce confusion and support follow-through. In public administration, reminders, simplification, and well-chosen defaults can increase participation in beneficial programs and reduce avoidable mistakes. The book's point is not that every problem can be solved by nudges alone. Many issues also involve incentives, resources, laws, and structural inequality. But it argues that behavioral design is often neglected despite being highly effective. Sometimes important improvements do not require sweeping coercion or massive spending. They require better understanding of how decisions actually happen. This is part of what makes the book appealing. It offers a practical middle ground. Instead of relying only on commands from above or idealized faith in individual rationality, it proposes smarter design. That proposal carries both promise and responsibility, because once systems are seen as behavior-shaping environments, the design of those systems becomes a matter of serious consequence. Because Nudge is a book about steering behavior, ethical concerns naturally arise. If institutions can influence people through defaults, framing, reminders, and presentation, then where is the line between help and manipulation? Thaler and Sunstein take this question seriously. Their general answer is that nudges should be transparent, easy to opt out of, and directed toward outcomes that people themselves would often endorse under conditions of fuller reflection. The legitimacy of a nudge depends not only on whether it works, but on whether it respects agency. A hidden system designed to exploit weakness for someone else's gain is very different from a clear system designed to reduce friction around beneficial choices. This distinction matters enormously. The book's best version of nudging is not sneaky domination. It is user-centered design informed by behavioral realism. Even so, the risk of overreach remains. Once institutions see how much design can steer people, they may be tempted to go too far or assume too much authority over what counts as welfare. This is why humility is so important. Choice architects are also human. They too are biased, limited, and capable of error. Good nudges must therefore be revisable, accountable, and open to public scrutiny. In that sense, the ethical discussion in the book is not a side issue. It is central. Influence through design is inevitable, so the moral question is how to make that influence legitimate. One of the deeper achievements of Nudge is that it changes how freedom itself is understood. Public debate often treats freedom and guidance as opposites. Either people are left alone to choose, or authorities intervene and constrain them. Thaler and Sunstein challenge that binary. They suggest that freedom does not disappear when choices are structured. Choices are always structured. The more relevant question is whether they are structured well. A form can be easy or confusing. A default can support or undermine long-term welfare. A menu can clarify or overwhelm. A system can preserve options while still making some more accessible than others. Once this is admitted, freedom no longer means absence of architecture. It means living in environments where architecture is designed responsibly and where alternatives remain real. This is a subtle but important shift. It suggests that truly usable freedom may depend on better design rather than simply less design. People are not most free when every decision is maximally burdensome. They are often more free when systems help them act on their actual goals without trapping them in avoidable friction and confusion. After spending time with this book, many ordinary situations start to look different. A subscription process, a savings plan, a school form, a food display, an app notification, a donation screen, a workplace benefit, or a public notice no longer appears as neutral background. It appears as designed influence. You begin to ask, what is the default here? What path requires the least effort? What assumptions are built into this layout? What is being made visible and what is being buried? What behavior is being encouraged without directly commanding it? This shift in perception is one of the book's enduring gifts. It makes people more thoughtful not only as policymakers or managers, but as citizens and users. It also creates practical self-awareness. If you know that you are likely to procrastinate, forget, follow defaults, or be swayed by social cues, then you can begin building better personal environments as well. Nudge is not only about how institutions shape people. It can also be about how people shape their own choices more intelligently. If we gather the book's main lessons into a concise form, they would sound something like this. First, people are highly influenced by the context in which choices are made. Second, there is no neutral way to present options, so design always matters. Third, defaults are especially powerful because many people go along with them. Fourth, self-control problems are normal, so systems should help people align action with long-term goals. Fifth, social norms and framing shape behavior more than most people realize. Sixth, too many choices can produce confusion rather than empowerment. Seventh, preserving freedom does not require pretending people are perfectly rational. And finally, better decision-making often depends less on demanding heroic willpower than on building better environments. These lessons are practical because they apply almost everywhere, from government and business to family routines and personal habits. The deeper message is not that people are weak. It is that they are human, and systems should be designed with that fact in mind. The enduring importance of nudge lies in a simple but transformative observation. Human behavior is shaped not only by intention or character, but by structure. The way options are presented, the effort required to act, the defaults that take effect when nothing is done, and the cues people receive from their environment all influence what happens next. Richard H. Thaler and Cass R. Sunstein ask us to take that influence seriously. They show that freedom and guidance need not always be enemies, and that better outcomes often begin with better design. The book does not promise perfect decisions or flawless institutions. What it offers is more realistic and more useful. It offers a way of thinking that respects human limitations without surrendering human agency. In a world full of choices, many of them complex and consequential, that may be one of the most valuable forms of wisdom we can have.